You know those warning signs people always tell you about in relationships? The little red flags you're supposed to notice before things go sideways? Yeah, I missed all of them. Hi, I'm Chris, a marketing manager who fell for the wrong woman at exactly the wrong time. Her name was Jessica, and she was the kind of person who could convince you the sky was green if she smiled just right. We met at work, of course. The number one place they tell you not to date, but Jessica wasn't just a coworker, she was the coworker. Smart, charming, and just unattainable enough to make her irresistible. She had this way of walking into a room and making everyone feel like they were background characters in her movie. When she started sitting next to me in meetings and laughing at my jokes, even the bad ones, I thought, this is it. I've won the office lottery. Things move fast. After a few late nights working on a big pitch, we started seeing each other outside the office. Drinks turned into dinners, dinners turned into weekends at her place, and before I knew it, I was bringing her coffee every morning and fantasizing about our future together. She was perfect, or so I thought. The first crack in the illusion came during a Monday morning meeting. Jessica had just given a presentation that was so good it made the rest of us look like amateurs. As the room applauded, I noticed our boss, Mr. Green, lingering a little too long when he congratulated her. "Fantastic work, Jessica," he said, his hand resting on her shoulder a beat longer than necessary. "We'll have to discuss this further over dinner." Her smile didn't waver. "Of course, Mr. Green. Anything for the team." I told myself it was nothing, just a boss recognizing talent. But something about the way she avoided eye contact with me when she sat back down made my stomach churn. Later that day, I brought it up casually. "So, dinner with Mr. Green, huh?" She shrugged, not even looking up from her phone. "It's just work. Don't overthink it." Her tone was light, dismissive, but the pit in my stomach grew. It wasn't until a few weeks later, when I stumbled across a clue I couldn't ignore, that I realized the truth. Jessica wasn't just dating me, she was playing an entirely different game. They say love makes you blind, but I think it just makes you really, really bad at math. Because when I started adding up all the little things about Jessica, none of it made sense. Take her phone, for example. She was always glued to it, texting furiously and smiling at the screen, but if I asked, "Who's that?" she'd always answer the same way. "Oh, just work stuff." At first, I bought it. We were in marketing, after all. Work never really stopped. But then there was the way she'd lock her screen anytime I walked by, like she was hiding state secrets. Then came the late nights. "Sorry, babe," she'd say, slipping on her heels. "Mr. Green needs me to stay late for a project. He's counting on me." Every time she mentioned his name, it sounded just a little too familiar. But I told myself it was nothing. After all, Jessica was ambitious. She wanted to climb the ladder, and if that meant cozying up to the boss, who was I to judge? But then there was the elevator incident. One night, I stayed late myself, trying to finish a report. Around 9 p.m., I decided to head out, and as I passed the elevator, I heard voices. "Thanks for the drink," Jessica said, her voice soft and playful. "No problem," Mr. Green replied. "Anything for my star employee." The elevator doors opened, and there they were, Jessica laughing at something he'd said, and Mr. Green looking just a little too pleased with himself. I ducked into a nearby hallway before they could see me. My mind raced, but I forced myself to stay calm. It could be innocent, I told myself. Maybe he's just mentoring her. But the more I watched, the less innocent it seemed. Jessica started getting little perks, the best assignments, compliments during meetings, and even a new corner desk. "Lucky break," she said when I asked about it. "Yeah, lucky," I muttered, my stomach tightening. The breaking point came when I accidentally glanced at her laptop during lunch. She'd left it open to an email chain with Mr. Green, and the subject line read, "Dinner Friday, just us?" My pulse quickened. I didn't read the email, okay, I skimmed it, but the tone was suggestive. That night, as Jessica chatted away about her exciting new project, I smiled and nodded like everything was fine. But inside, I was done pretending. If Jessica wanted to play games, I was about to show her I could play too. By the time Jessica's dinner with Mr. Green rolled around, I'd graduated from suspicious boyfriend to full-blown detective. I wasn't proud of it, but desperate times call for desperate measures, and when your girlfriend is possibly two-timing you with your boss, you tend to set ethics aside. My first move? Accessing our company's shared calendar. Sure enough, Mr. Green had an appointment listed for Friday evening, marked simply as off-site meeting. Subtle. The next step was gathering evidence. On Friday afternoon, while Jessica was in a meeting, I borrowed her laptop. A few clicks and a quick search later, I found what I was looking for: emails and chat messages between her and Mr. Green. At first, it was all professional, updates on projects, meeting notes, the usual. But then, buried in a thread about marketing budgets, was a message that made my stomach drop. Looking forward to tonight. I'll make sure it's special. Special? What kind of budget discussion was this? That evening, Jessica left the apartment in a sleek black dress, claiming she had to go over some last-minute details with Mr. Green. "Don't wait up," she said, kissing me on the cheek like I was a loyal golden retriever. I smiled and waved, watching her leave. As soon as the door closed, I grabbed my jacket and followed. The restaurant wasn't hard to find, one of those upscale places where the menu doesn't have prices because if you have to ask, you can't afford it. I waited outside, tucked into the shadows, until I saw them arrive. Jessica and Mr. Green walked in together, laughing like they didn't have a care in the world. My fists clenched, but I forced myself to stay calm. This wasn't the moment to confront her, not yet. Instead, I took out my phone and started recording. A few minutes later, I had all the proof I needed: Jessica and Mr. Green sharing drinks, leaning in close, and smiling like two people who definitely weren't just talking about quarterly projections. By the time I got home, my plan was fully formed. Jessica and Mr. Green thought they were in control, but they were about to find out just how wrong they were. Monday morning, I walked into the office like nothing was wrong. Jessica smiled at me from across the room, her usual radiant self, and for a moment, I almost admired how seamlessly she lived this double life. Almost. Meanwhile, Mr. Green gave his usual enthusiastic speech at our team meeting, his tone brimming with false sincerity. I couldn't help but smirk as I looked at him, knowing his carefully curated image was about to shatter. I waited until lunch to set my plan in motion. The company's internal chat system was the perfect battleground, accessible to everyone and impossible to ignore. While Jessica and Mr. Green were conveniently away from their desks, I assumed they were having another work lunch. I uploaded a file labeled "Important" for all team members. Inside the folder, screenshots, emails, proof of their not-so-professional relationship. The reaction was immediate. Messages began popping up in the chat. "What is this? Is this real? OMG, this is insane." By the time Jessica and Mr. Green returned, the entire office was buzzing. Colleagues stared at their screens in stunned silence, while others whispered in corners, sneaking glances at Jessica as she walked by. Jessica noticed the shift in atmosphere immediately. "What's going on?" she asked one of the interns. The intern stammered, unable to meet her eyes. "You should check the chat," she mumbled. Jessica sat down at her desk, clicked on the file, and froze. Her face turned a shade of pale I didn't think was possible. Mr. Green wasn't far behind. He stormed out of his office moments later, his face red and his voice booming. "Who posted this?" No one answered, but the side eyes in my direction weren't subtle. Jessica hurried over to me, her voice a frantic whisper. "Chris, what the hell is this?" I leaned back in my chair, keeping my tone calm. "Oh, you mean the proof of your extracurricular activities with our boss? Just thought the team deserved to know who they're really working with." Her mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. "It's not what it looks like." "Sure it's not," I said, standing up and grabbing my bag. "But here's the thing, Jessica, I'm done being part of your little soap opera. I walked out, leaving her and Mr. Green to deal with the fallout. By the time I got home, my phone was blowing up with messages from coworkers. That was legendary. Dude, are you okay? I can't believe you did that. I poured myself a drink, leaned back on the couch, and smiled for the first time in weeks. The game was over, and I'd finally taken the win. The aftermath of my little office exposé was nothing short of chaos. By Tuesday morning, Mr. Green had been invited to resign for his unprofessional conduct. HR called it a breach of company policy, but let's be honest, it was just damage control. Jessica? Well, she didn't last much longer. Whether she quit out of shame or was quietly pushed out, I didn't really care. All I knew was that by the end of the week, her desk was cleared out, and the office felt lighter. My own exit was much less dramatic. I handed in my resignation a few weeks later, citing personal growth as my reason. My manager, who had been unusually kind since the incident, nodded sympathetically. "You deserve better, Chris," she said. Damn right I did. With my newfound freedom, I decided it was time for a fresh start. I used the skills I'd honed over years in marketing to launch my own business, a boutique agency that focused on authenticity. No more corporate drama, no more fake smiles. Just honest work. I even threw myself into new hobbies: hiking, cooking, learning to play guitar. It was amazing how much space I had in my life without Jessica's constant demands for attention. Then came the inevitable message. A month after I left the company, Jessica reached out. "Hey, Chris. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. I messed up. I hope you're doing okay." I stared at the text for a moment, debating whether to respond. Part of me wanted to fire back with something cutting, but I took a deep breath and deleted it instead. Jessica didn't deserve my energy. She never had. The final chapter of this saga came when my business landed its first major client, a rival company to the one I'd just left. As I signed the contract, I couldn't help but think of Jessica and Mr. Green. Later that evening, I posted a photo of the signed deal on my business's Instagram page with a simple caption. "To the people who doubted me, thank you for the motivation. You know who you are." For the first time in months, I felt truly at peace. Life wasn't perfect, but it was mine, and I was finally living it on my own terms. A year after the chaos, I found myself walking into a cafe I'd never been to before, clutching a folder of business proposals for my agency's latest pitch. Life had shifted in ways I couldn't have imagined. The bitterness of betrayal had faded, replaced by something lighter, clarity. While waiting for my coffee, I heard a familiar laugh. I turned and, sure enough, there she was, Jessica. She looked different. The usual shine in her eyes was dimmed, her confidence muted. She was sitting alone, scrolling through her phone with a frown. For a moment, I debated walking away unnoticed, but then she looked up and saw me. "Chris," she said, her voice a mix of surprise and something like regret. "Jessica," I replied, nodding politely. She hesitated, then gestured to the empty seat across from her. "Do you have a minute?" I didn't, really, but I sat down anyway. "How have you been?" she asked, trying to sound casual. "Better," I said, letting the word hang between us. She nodded, biting her lip. "I heard about your agency." "Congrats. It's impressive." "Thanks," I said, my tone even. "How about you? Still climbing ladders?" Her face reddened, and she let out a soft laugh. "I guess I deserve that." There was a long silence before she spoke again. "Chris, I really am sorry. For everything." I studied her for a moment, looking for signs of the Jessica I used to know. She seemed genuine, but the truth was, it didn't matter anymore. "I appreciate that," I said finally. "But I'm not angry, Jessica. Honestly, I should probably thank you." She blinked. "Thank me?" "Yeah," I said, standing up. "You taught me what I don't want in my life. And that's the most valuable lesson I've ever learned." As I left the cafe, I felt an overwhelming sense of closure. There was no lingering resentment, no what-ifs. Jessica was part of my story, but she wasn't the ending. Because for the first time in a long time, I was writing my own. Subscribe to never miss a new story and discover even more captivating tales.